in our Eyewitness News Daily News tracking poll, which shows David Dinkins has a clear lead among likely voters, 53% to 39%. That is a trend that has continued for most of this week. And now the great mayoral debates.
This is an Eyewitness News special presentation. The 89 vote. Tonight, Democrat David Dinkins, Republican liberal Rudolph Giuliani, right-to-life candidate Henry Hewes, together for the great mayoral debate. Now live from the studios of WABC-TV in New York, Eyewitness News anchorman Bill Butel.
Good evening. This is the showdown we have been waiting for. We will finally hear what the candidates for mayor of New York have to say to one another. With us live tonight are the Democratic candidate David Dinkins, the right-to-life candidate Henry Hewes, and the Republican liberal candidate Rudolph Giuliani. Invited but declining to appear is the conservative candidate Ronald Lauder. Joining me are my colleagues Doug Johnson, who has been covering the Giuliani campaign, Eyewitness News anchor Roz Abrams, and reporter Tim Minton, who has been covering the Dinkins campaign. Now here is how the debate's going to work. One candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a question from a panelist. The other candidates will then each have 1 minute to respond to the first candidate's statements. Then the first candidate will have 1 minute for rebuttal. The candidates have drawn straws to see to determine the order in which they will be questioned. I have our first question directed to Mr. Giuliani. Mr. Giuliani, at a candidates forum only this week, you conceded that the people of New York City have rather low expectations about your compassion and your ability to solve the problems of suffering and poverty in this city. In a city where there is as much racial division as there is, how would you bring about harmony and reconciliation were you to be elected?
Bringing together the people of this city is something that is very important, and no one person has a monopoly on that. If that were the case, that would actually lead, that kind of feeling would actually lead to more division rather than unity. I understand that you have to work very, very hard, and you always do, to bring together the people of this city. Upon being elected mayor, what I would do is to create a council of leaders in New York City, representing all of the different groups in the city, so that we could talk about these problems outside the context of reacting to an act of violence. It really is a shame that the only time we seem to be able to discuss ways of coming together better is when some terrible tragedy occurs. It's important for the mayor of the city to spend time meeting with and talking to all of the people of the city in these groups outside of that context. It's also important to create hope and opportunity in all of the communities in New York City. That's why I favor an expanded youth corps. So we take the young people of the city, we put them to work to help clean up New York, to help on the social problems of New York, and we give scholarships to those youngsters who want to go on to college, and then we have them pay for it by coming back and working for New York City for 4 or 5 years so that we create a connection between the city of New York and young people. We've got to create hope for our young people in New York. Very, very important that we also understand that we need representative government. We need people in high places in government that represent the black community, the Latino community, all of the different other religious and ethnic groups, and it's important to work at it. And I think I would have a particular responsibility, given the nature of this election, to make certain that that occurs, and I'm committed to it.
Under the rules of our debate now, Mr. Dinkins has a response to Mr. Giuliani's answer.
Well, clearly one of the prime concerns that all of us have or should have is race relations in our city. I have said throughout this campaign, indeed throughout the primary, that New York City is not the melting pot that I was taught it was when I went to grammar school in Harlem a long time ago. It's instead a gorgeous mosaic of persons of varying ethnic backgrounds and religions, and I say we need to reach out and try to understand the backgrounds and heritages of other peoples, hopefully to come to love one another, but if not that, to understand one another, and with that understanding will come respect. It's important that we have role models, that young people understand that they can achieve, that we adults and as a society owe them. Whenever I go to a school, I'm confident that I reach 2 or 3 each time I reach out for them. Among the things we need is to pass the legislation offered by Senator David Paterson, the bias-related violence bill. It's tremendously important. I think we're going to get it.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkins. A response now from Mr. Hewes.
Well, I think that you have to start with the way that the city sees itself. And New York City should see itself as a very pluralistic city. We should be, for instance, the greatest Hispanic city in the United States. There should be a place in the city for all of the groups that were mentioned before, and more importantly, we have to look at all the people of the city as resources in making New York the greatest town in the world. I'd go beyond that, though, to say that many of the problems that we face in New York now are based in our reluctance as human beings to reach out and truly be concerned about and take action and make sacrifices to help the other people around us, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, women, children, unborn, born. And I think that if the city is going to get better, it's going to get better based on our collective willingness to build our civilization by reaching out to others.
Now, under the rules of the debate, we return to Mr. Giuliani for a rebuttal to the responses. Mr. Giuliani.
Talk about unity and healing is important, but progress is even more important. What we've really got to do, if we're going to make progress, is to reduce crime, control the epidemic of drugs, reform substantially our school system, and offer real hope of progress to young people. What we need to do is to move this city forward again, and not just talk about general platitudes. Because in fact, if we talk about unity and healing, and next year there were more murders in New York. We set a record for murder last year. If next year there are more muggings in New York, if next year the schools continue to deteriorate, then we're actually going to have more division and more disharmony in this city. So real progress is what is necessary, and working toward it.
Thank you. We turn now to Doug Johnson, who has a question for Mr. Hewes. Doug?
Well, Mr. Hewes, you have very little staff, not much money. I think you spent about $1,000 of your own money in this campaign. You've not been highly visible. Yet, you are here virtually because Mr. Dinkins has insisted on that. Why do you think he wants you here, but is apparently willing to exclude others on the ballot, such as Warren Rahm, the Libertarian candidate, Lenora Fulani of the New Alliance Party, and James Harris of the Socialist Workers' Party?
Well, I don't need to explain to you the way that politics work in New York State, but there are 5 parties that are recognized in the state of New York as parties. All of those other candidates are not running as representative of recognized parties, parties that have gotten over 50,000 votes in the last gubernatorial election and have a place on the ballot. They are all running as independents, and there is no history of independents gaining the same number of votes as the representatives of the conservative, liberal, Democratic, Republican, or right-to-life party. That's the rationale for where you draw the line. You have to draw the line somewhere. Mr. Dinkins' insistence was for inclusion of all of that tier of candidates. I think it's very appropriate because in running for mayor, one of the problems that I have had is gaining visibility in order to present myself to the public. I'm the only candidate in this race who is a conservative. I'm the only candidate who will say he's proud to be a Reagan Republican. And I'm the only candidate who's talking about the issues. And I hope that this participation in this debate will give me an opportunity to talk about the things that are really wrong with New York and the things that we all have to get together and do. Because New York City is in great trouble. We have big problems to solve. We have a crisis with people who are afflicted with AIDS, which the city is doing absolutely nothing about except giving out a couple of hundred free needles to drug addicts. We have a school system that is collapsing around our ears and mortgaging the future of our children. There are tens and tens of thousands of children at this very moment who are living lives of quiet desperation in homes with drug-addicted parents or parents who are otherwise dysfunctional. There are hundreds of thousands of children being aborted in this city every year. And these problems are very, very serious. They'll only get better, however, if we talk about them. And that's why I think it's important that I appear here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Hewes. I invite a response now from Mr. Dinkins.
Thank you. Mr. Hewes is quite right that my insistence on inclusion of those who were standard bearers of the recognized parties is, to me, quite logical. I see no reason for excluding members of parties that qualify for our ballot by having gotten at least 50,000 votes in the gubernatorial. I come from a background of people that have been excluded over time, and it seems to me that I should recognize that and ought to behave that way. I would like to make the observation that during the primary there came a time when the mayor, Ed Koch, said that it was a 2-person contest, and therefore the debate should involve just the 2 of us. but I debated all three, and not once, not twice, but 4 times. So my position is quite consistent. This, to me, makes a lot of sense, and you will note that Mr. Hewes speaks of things other than right to life.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinkins. Mr. Giuliani, your response, please.
You know, I can't really tell you why David wanted him here. Maybe David wants to play Mr. Nice Guy and have Hewes do his dirty work for him. What you should realize is that the two of them, they're basically on one side, I'm on the other. They're both here to make the same points, and they come out of a very similar kind of background. As I've pointed out about David, he's a clubhouse politician. Clubhouse politicians vote on contracts. They give contracts. Now, Henry here is a right-to-life candidate, but what you got to understand about Henry is he's also a developer. Henry has 4 or 5 contracts that were voted on by the Board of Estimate in which David Dinkins voted in favor of those contracts. And you also should understand that Henry's firm has given a campaign contribution to David Dinkins. So what we essentially have here are the two of them against me. I'm the reformer. I want to change those rules. I want to see if we can have a fundamentally different kind of system in New York City.
Mr. Hewes, your turn for rebuttal.
I didn't think I'd need a rebuttal, but I apparently do. It's not correct that my firm has given a campaign contribution to Mr. Dinkins. I do have a partner who supports Mr. Dinkins, and he has given a contribution. I own no part of such a firm and am in no way responsible for such a contribution. I am a builder of low and moderate income housing, and the votes at the Board of Estimate are absolutely ministerial. There is no, I'm sure David didn't even know that I was involved or any of his people at the time they were voted on. I think that those insinuations are nothing less than ugly and divisive. But let me say that I'd like to use the last few seconds of my rebuttal to address the panel. We've had 2 questions so far, and I don't believe either one has been on the issues. And I think too much of this campaign has been occupied with coverage of Mr. Giuliani's accusations. And I think that I'd ask you at least to give some thought to asking us all some questions about what we would do about the problems of the city of New York rather than these side issues.
Mr. Hewes, I appreciate your suggestion, and I guarantee you we're going to do precisely that.
Only got 2 more questions from me, though, right? We wasted one already.
Yes, we turn now to Roz Abrams. She has a question for David Dinkins.
Mr. Dinkins, this question has certainly been an issue in this campaign. You did not pay your taxes for 4 years. Last month, your campaign was bogged down under criticism of your handling of a stock transfer to your son. Mr. Giuliani says that those are examples of continuing sloppy management, which does not belong in the mayor's office. Should voters take your financial controversies into consideration when assessing your managerial abilities?
No question about it. I think they should look at my total record. And I think they should be mindful that with respect to income tax, that's something that occurred better than 20 years ago. And I've responded to and answered questions about that many, many times here at ABC. And that I've apologized. It's something that should not have happened. It's my fault. I accept full responsibility. But I paid all those taxes and filed all those returns a long time ago. With respect to the stock transfer, there's nothing improper about that transfer. And I had a press conference that lasted almost 2 hours. 40 or 50 of the toughest reporters anywhere in this country were there. They questioned me at great length. And when that was over, the newspapers of this town, save one, endorsed David Dinkins with full knowledge of that. So I suggest that they examine me very carefully, far more than one will get to do in this debate with 1 or 2 questions, and they came away satisfied with what I had to say. I think that Mr. Giuliani has made much of this, and I understand that. He does not wish to discuss issues. I do. I agree with Henry Hewes when he says that we ought to discuss issues. I had a press conference today surrounded by top Democrats, George Mitchell, the majority leader of the Senate, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, others, Congressman Charles Rangel. We were there and prepared to talk issues. 40 minutes. All questions had to do with negative type things. So I suggest, most respectfully, that if we really want to know about issues, those should be the questions. I have appeared before hundreds and hundreds of audiences since I announced my candidacy way back on February 14th. Mr. Giuliani entered this contest in May. I've been answering questions. People know who I am and that for which I stand.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkins. We will now have a response from Mr. Hewes.
Well, I'm not happy that David didn't pay his taxes according to the time schedule years ago. I'm sure he's not. But I think that once again, you're talking about something that happened 20 years ago. I have no doubts about David's integrity. And I think that we really are getting sidetracked by talking about a bunch of things which have very little to do with the way this city is going to be governed. And, you know, you had one question so far on Dinkins' taxes, one question on why Hewes is at the debate, and the first question was so forgettable I don't even remember what it was. Let us talk about the issues here. There are serious problems that the city has. We have schools, we have crime in the street to a point where many citizens in many neighborhoods of the city are scared to go out of their houses after 6 o'clock. We have no jails to put people in. We have no drug treatment centers for people walking in and off the street asking for drug treatment. These are serious issues. Please ask us some questions about these issues.
Not to be contentious, Mr. Hewes, but I would suggest that the people who are watching would think that the questions we have asked so far do deal with issues.
Now I get a rebuttal from that too, Bill?
We turn to Mr. Giuliani for a response.
I think Henry and David just made my point. They're running almost like a ticket here. The two of them seem to agree on everything. I happen to think that issues are very important also, and I've spoken out on them, put out a tremendous number of issue papers, and very much want to discuss the issues of crime, drugs, education, the budget. However, there's one issue that probably is more important than all of those, and that's the character and the integrity of the person who's going to run this city for the next 4 years. And you can't tell me that's not an issue. Now, David did have that long press conference, and he promised to open up the stock books of the company to show whether that story he was telling was true. That still hasn't been done. There's a cover-up going on here. That's important because that cover-up should not be carried over into the mayor's office. Let's see if the story is true. Open up the stock record books. Let's see if, in fact, that stock was transferred. In the last week, we've also seen disclosures that on 11,000 occasions, David has concealed the business affiliation of the people contributing to his campaign. That's more than half the times. These are important issues. They go to character, integrity, and honesty.
Time's up, Mr. Giuliani. We turn now for a rebuttal to Mr. Dinkins.
You know, Mr. Hewes and I don't agree on all things. We don't agree on freedom of choice. Mr. Giuliani used to agree with him, but he doesn't anymore. He says that now he agrees with me. It's not quite clear. First, he said that he was opposed to abortion back on March the 6th, 1989. Then on July 5th, he said that he had a different personal and moral view about abortion than other candidates, and he would not be able to lobby in Albany on that. Then on March the 15th, he said that abortion was a silly, irrelevant issue. Then on September the 11th, he said that I never called for overturning Roe v. Wade. And I got to tell you, it seems to me that he has altered his position greatly. He used to agree with Mr. Hewes. Now he says he agrees with me. With respect to all of... I see I'm out of time.
5 seconds left. Yes, you, Mr. Dinkins, thank you very much. We turn now to my colleague Tim Minton, who has a question for Mr. Giuliani. Tim?
Mr. Giuliani, during the Republican primary, you blasted opponent Ronald Lauder for his TV commercials, which you said unfairly characterized his positions. Yet in this general election campaign, you're running negative ads of your own that critics have condemned and Mr. Dinkins calls scurrilous. Is it okay for Mr. Lauder, or wrong for Mr. Lauder, but okay for you?
First, let me note that David didn't answer the question about the stock records, whether he's going to reveal them or not. Instead, he went ahead and tried to introduce the issue of abortion, which I'm happy to address. I'm sure you're going to answer a question about it. But, David, where are the stock books? Where are the stock records? Where are the 11,000 business affiliations of the people that have been contributing money to your campaign? You can't keep running away. Election day is getting very close. Now, on this issue about Lauder ran unfair ads about me, ads that were untrue. If David can point out to things that I've put in ads that were untrue, then fine, we'll correct it. But what we put in ads come right out of the newspapers. David has an extraordinary record for a person running for public office. People usually don't run for mayor of the city of New York who haven't paid their taxes for 4 years. People usually don't run for mayor of New York who are involved in so many violations of the law and ethical duties. These are important things to bring out to the people of the city. That's what we've done. They are absolutely accurate, and I stand by them.
Mr. Hewes, would you have a response, please, to Mr. Giuliani?
Well, I'm going to say this only one more time, that this is now the 4th out of 8 questions without one focusing on any issue of importance to the city. I would use my response time here, I think, to say that there is a situation with one candidate against the other two here. But Mr. Giuliani is mistaken in placing him against Dinkins and Hewes. I am, in fact, the conservative. Both Mr. Dinkins and Mr. Giuliani stand for the status quo in New York. And really, although their temperaments are substantially different and the character of their administrations would be different, the policies that they would pursue probably would not vary much from those of Ed Koch. They have made no substantial proposals for any basic change in the city. I am the one conservative candidate in this race. I am the one proud Republican candidate in this race, and I'm the one candidate who is really proposing dramatic, new, and credible solutions to the problems we all face as citizens of the city.
A response now, Mr. Dinkins, to Mr. Giuliani's.
Well, I noticed that Mr. Hewes used the R word, and he's willing to use it. Interestingly enough, that the standard bearer for the Republican Party doesn't want to use the R word. You know, I've revealed my records, income tax returns over 19 years, giving waivers so you can look at all my records, but I want to know just when is Mr. Giuliani going to reveal the clients of White and Case. Now, we know only of 3 that he represents, and he says he didn't know about Noriega, didn't know about the company that deals with Libya where they apparently are manufacturing poison gas. He says he doesn't know about these things. Now, I don't know what other clients White and Case has, but perhaps there's some conflicts. I'm not suggesting that they are, but it seems to me that we ought to play by one set of rules. We've been waiting now for 14 days for him to come forth and reveal his. And what about FBI and
Dinkins,
other
your time is up,
background checks?
Rebuttal now from Mr. Giuliani.
We still haven't heard about whether he's going to show us those stock books and stock records, which I think he's going to continue to conceal until after this election. However, let me make a point that is a very big distinction between David Dinkins and me. I've had FBI background checks. I've held some of the highest security clearances that this country has. And at every point at which I was nominated by the President of the United States, I was confirmed by the Senate based on a public hearing, including all the Democrats in the Senate who read through my FBI file. I've paid my taxes every year. I've lived up to my legal obligations, and you can be darn sure you don't get through a Senate confirmation if you got the kind of record that he's had.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now we turn to a question from me to Mr. Hewes. And Mr. Hewes, I guarantee you that what I'm going to ask you now, you will call an issue. Many say that the New York City school system is in disarray, a great deal of disarray. A huge percentage of students did not graduate in the 87-88 school year or for the many years preceding that school year. There were more than 1,800 weapons confiscated at the public schools in New York City. On top of that, the local businesses in our city complain continually they cannot find high school graduates with sufficient and competent training to fill the jobs they have. All of you, yourself included, I presume, have promised to work with the new schools chancellor, Dr. Fernandez. But beyond that, Mr. Hewes, what would you specifically do to improve our schools?
I think our schools are perhaps the greatest long-term disaster that's facing New York City. Because unless we prepare our children to face the world of the 21st century, it will prejudice the future of the city. And I think we have to look at the school system and recognize that this is a system that has totally failed. It's not just a system in trouble or a system with some problems. It's a system that's totally failed. Even the people who are being graduated from the system, as you just said, Bill, are not sufficiently trained to take part in the world of work. I don't think it's enough to talk about new guidance counselors and reorganizing high schools. I think we need basic and very dramatic change to take the control of the system away from the teachers' union and give it back to the parents of the children who are in the system. I would eliminate the Central Board of Education and go back to 50 or 60 locally elected and democratically controlled community school districts. Everybody else in the state of New York has democracy and control of their school systems. Why not the city of New York? I would also go out and fund schools with school vouchers. I think it's very important that all income levels, parents at all income levels, have the capacity, or at least some capacity, to choose the kind of education that their children undergo. I would also go out and begin to make structural changes in the way the schools are run, because our schools are still essentially being run as they were set up and operated in the 1930s. In a day when most mothers work, the children are still dumped into the street at 3 o'clock. We need schools that will be there all day. In a day when some college is necessary for any real work, we still cut off a high school. We should be going up through the community college system. I think that we must go and look at this, and we must make real dramatic changes if we're not going to mortgage the future of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Hewes. I invite a response now from Mr. Giuliani.
The New York City school system needs major reform, and I'd work with Chancellor Fernandez, but I'd be a leader for that kind of reform. First of all, we're going to have to cut the administration and the bureaucracy dramatically. Over 6,000 administrators who make it impossible for teachers really to teach and children to learn. A tremendous amount of time wasted on evaluations and reevaluations. We need drug-free zones around schools. We need more choice for our schools. My opponent, David Dinkins, says it's unfair to criticize the Central School Board. I don't think it's unfair to criticize the Central School Board. If you don't criticize it, you're never going to be able to reform it and change it, and I'm committed to reforming it. And we're going to have to make schools safer, and we're going to have to subdivide schools into smaller programs so that we get parents more involved in many different ways in the teaching of their children. In short, what we need is major reform, not an attitude of, oh, gee, it's unfair to criticize the Central School Board, maybe because of political entanglements.
A response now from Mr. Dinkins, if you will, sir.
Mr. Giuliani continues with distortions and half-truths. I have never said that it was unfair to criticize the Central Board. What I have said is that we ought to blame the Republican-controlled state Senate that it's blocked a fair share for New York. We've got 37% of the students. We get but 33% of the money. The difference is a minimum of $287 million each year. And Dickstein says that it could reach as high as $400 million. I have said that. I have criticized the Senate about that because it is their fault. The hope and future of our city is in our young people. I cannot understand for the life of me how we as a society don't seem to understand that our young people will replace us all one day, and it's essential that we see that they get educated. I've got some fine accomplishments in the area of education. I know that my opponent has been, that is my main opponent, Mr. Giuliani, has been busy being a prosecutor. I've been busy trying to get children educated, and have made some great progress in that direction.
Rebuttal now from Mr. Hewes, please.
I think that the answers that you've heard just now from Mr. Dinkins and Giuliani spell out the problem. You have two guys here who are saying that the system needs some reform, needs some more money, some more hall room monitors, some drug-free zones. I don't think that that is the depth of the problem. If you go out and you look at schools where children are taking classes in toilets, where there's no heat in the schools, where in some schools you simply have cages where kids are being kept for a requisite period of time, this is a disaster out here. And it is nothing less than a completely new system that we need. And this is symptomatic of the election where you have the candidates of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Liberal Party calling for no substantial change in the system, for a little wiser, a little tougher of Ed Koch's policies. And that's the argument, I think, for electing me.
Thank you, Mr. Hewes, very much. I turn now to Doug Johnson, who has a question for David Dinkins.
Well, I hope this falls within Mr. Hewes' newly created guidelines. But, Mr. Dinkins, as you know, we've seen a lot of corruption and inefficiency at City Hall in the past few years. Some people say that happens sometimes when one party has been in power for a long time. You've not been touched by corruption, but you're well aware of the names of those who have fallen from grace. Your opponent has suggested that if you're elected, it would be business as usual at City Hall. What do you say to him or to others who say, if you are elected, it would be more of the same?
Well, first of all, I'll say it's not true. It's not true. While I have many quarrels with Mr. Giuliani, I don't say that he would be Richard Nixon. I don't say that at all. And I think it unfair and inaccurate to suggest that because there have been some people who've been in government in New York City who were Democrats, who committed crimes while in office, that is to suggest that some Democrats who succeed them will somehow or other be cut from the same cloth. I would remind you and our viewers that I ran in a Democratic primary against the incumbent. I cited as one of the things of concern to me the fact that the Sovereign Commission had said that there was much difficulty, and it stemmed really from the executive branch in appointments. What I intend to do is to see to it that all those persons that I give the responsibility of operating in a Dinkins administration be persons of impeccable reputations and persons of ability and qualifications, so that there will be no question but that merit will be the first consideration. It is true, I come from a political background. I'm a Democrat like Mario Cuomo and like John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Ed Koch and a lot of the, yes, I'm a Democrat. Mr. Giuliani is a Republican. He doesn't like to admit that he's a Republican, but that's what he is. He gets annoyed when I call him a Republican. I don't know why. Perhaps it's because he feels the need to defend the Republican philosophy of a long time, a philosophy that has devastated our urban centers, that costs us an awful lot of money in housing in New York. A large measure of the reason that we have homeless in our streets is the fact that the federal budget on housing has been slashed from some $31 billion to down under $7 billion.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkins. We turn now to Mr. Giuliani for a response.
That's a heck of an answer on corruption, to bash the Republican Party. I'm proud of being a Republican, and we can talk about that later, but let's talk about corruption for a moment, because that's what the question was about. David Dinkins has no record in fighting corruption. Not only that, he would set an example that is a very, very poor one. He's carrying into City Hall, if he should get there, more baggage than anyone that I can ever think of running for mayor, certainly a lot more than Ed Koch. There was a campaign finance law that was passed, largely due to my work in uncovering a lot of these corrupt politicians. And David Dinkins' record of compliance with that is blatant disregard for it. On 11,000 occasions, he's concealed the business affiliation of the people who have contributed money to him. That's a critical thing to determine conflicts of interest. He took 3 trips paid for by the largest union in this city, municipal union in this city, and he failed to disclose it. He concealed it on his financial disclosure form. What kind of example is that to give to people in a city where we have the corruption problems that we have?
May we have your response now, Mr. Hewes?
Yeah, well, first I would say to David that I get annoyed when you call Rudy Giuliani a Republican. But second, I'll go back to your question. I think you get half credit on it because it was possible to answer this question on the issues, but neither of the other candidates did. I don't think it is the arrest of Friedman or a couple of other top shots in the city that is the real issue on corruption. The real issue on corruption is the endemic corruption that leads to waste and mismanagement within the city. People who are not fired because they have a political connection. Systems which stay in place because nobody wants to fight the political battles. If we're going to have the resources in this city to do the things that absolutely need to be done, we have to go at the city government and cut out a lot of this waste and cut out a lot of this misuse of money. And I think that we have to realize that the basic corruption of the system is partially responsible for that kind of waste.
A rebuttal now for Mr. Dinkins, if you will, sir.
It is true that a union, District Council 37, a union that includes workers who empty bedpans and tend to frail elderly and staff our municipal government, it is true that they did invite me on 3 occasions to be one of the speakers at their educational seminars, as they invited various and sundry deputy mayors and other commissioners. And there's nothing at all wrong with that. They paid my expenses. I went down. I came back. I hope I made a contribution. Nothing at all wrong with that. It's amazing that Mr. Giuliani would seize upon this as suggesting somehow or other that some dark and nefarious deed had been done. But that's the way he is. That's the way he behaves. He's a prosecutor. And what we need in our city is a mayor, not a prosecutor. I appreciate that as a prosecutor, he behaved rather zealously. As a matter of fact, federal judges have made the observation that he was overzealous.
Our time is up. We turn now to my colleague, Roz Abrams, and Roz has a question for Mr. Giuliani.
Mr. Giuliani, if you ask the average New Yorkers what should be done about crime and drugs, some would say it's very simple. Intercept the drugs before they get into the neighborhoods and then put the dealers and the thieves in jail. Needless to say, the solution is not that simple. But why is it that we seem to be losing the battle against crime, against drugs, and what specifically are your plans for making our city safe?
I'm glad you asked that question. I think this does fit Mr. Hewes' criteria of an issue, and probably the single most important issue that faces the citizens of New York City. We've got to change the rules on the drug dealers and the street criminals. If we keep going merrily along, this city's going down. If we set a record for murder again next year, like we did this year, we need to deal with this drug problem like it's a business. It's the demand for drugs that drives it. We spend over $150 billion a year in America on drugs, a lot of that in New York City. We're going to have to start arresting people who buy drugs. It's a misdemeanor. It won't overcrowd our jails and prisons, but it will begin sending a message to the people probably 2 blocks away from here that are buying drugs and get away with it. It'd send a message to them that they better stop, and we'd cut out billions in that market. We've got to start going after the drug trade as a business, and that's why I helped create the federal drug forfeiture program. We've got to go after it as a business. We've got to take away the cars, the property, the businesses, and the homes of the drug dealers, as well as put them in prison. So we begin contracting it as a business. We're going to have to, in New York, we're going to have the death penalty. I'm in favor of the death penalty. David Dinkins is opposed to the death penalty, even for cop killers, despite the fact that the rules have now changed for police officers, and I know that because of my experience in law enforcement. We're going to have to patrol our streets much more effectively. We've cut down on the number of street patrolmen in the last 3 or 4 years, even though the number of police officers has increased. That's a terrible mistake. I'll change that. We'll put more police officers on the street so that you can call to a police officer to ask for help if you need it. And we will modernize the criminal justice system. Overtime is eating up thousands and thousands of hours of police officers. One police officer told me the other night that he spends 30, 40 hours just arraigning a prisoner. I've modernized criminal justice systems before. I would know how to modernize this one. Automate it. Use videotape. Get that police officer out in an hour or 2 so he can get out on the streets and protect us and make arrests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giuliani. A response, please, from Mr. Dinkins.
Well, I've called for doubling the number of community patrol officers in my first term and a cop on every subway train every night. I've got some plans with respect to crime and drugs. I know that 83% of those persons who go through central booking test positive for substance abuse, and therefore there are things we've got to do about that. Mr. Giuliani, with respect to the death penalty, says that he's for it and I'm not. Well, he's right. I'm opposed to it. I want life without any opportunity for parole. He said, however, in March and April that capital punishment was a phony issue. His words, not mine. On June 20th, he said the death penalty is what I describe as an irrelevant issue. Politicians play the death penalty game. On May 25th, he said capital punishment is an overemphasized issue in the criminal justice system. And finally, just recently on October 5th, he said that he vowed to lobby and fight very, very hard for a death penalty. So, you know, it's a little hard to figure out just what his positions are oft times. He changes a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkins. A response now from Mr. Hewes.
This is a great example of not talking about the real problem. Mr. Giuliani is calling for the arrest of drug dealers and drug users, but he knows full well there are no jail cells to put these people in. There are no drug treatment centers to put people in who come in off the street begging for treatment. There are none. You're talking about a man who comes in and says, I'm a cocaine addict, I'm mugging people, I'm killing people, help me. And they give him a slip saying, come back in 6 weeks. Right? The problem here is that our criminal justice system must have the resources to deal with the people once they are arrested. Right now, the system is not credible in the street. And it really isn't going to do you much good to put a few more cops on or put cops on trains because we have nothing to do with the people that we can arrest. Now, this is the issue, and this is what we should be talking about. And this is one reason why this campaign isn't working, is because we're not talking about the real issue.
A rebuttal now from Mr. Giuliani.
Neither one of them really understand the criminal justice area. It happens to be one that I do understand. David would put cops in subway trains. 2/3 of the crime on subways takes place in the station and on the platform. His cops would be kind of locked in the subway trains while the muggings were taking place on the subway platforms. You got to have revolving patrols in the subways in order to deal with crime. I understand that and know that. Drug buyers would not overcrowd. The arrest of drug buyers would not overcrowd the jails and prisons because it's a misdemeanor. The deterrent effect, however, which has been tried in other cities, would greatly reduce other things that have to be done.